Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was raised in Gotham by Batman. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Gotham City didn't just feel different, it tasted different. To 6-year-old Izuku Midoriya, it was the flavor of wet stone and metal, with a faint, bitter aftertaste like burned sugar. It was a stark contrast to the air in Mizudafu, which always seemed to carry the scent of cherry blossoms in the spring and the clean, electric tang of a city humming with quirks. Here, the air was heavy, clinging to the back of his throat. It was the air of a city that had been rained on for 1,000 years and had never quite dried. He pressed his face against the cool glass of the taxi window, his breath fogging a small circle. Outside, the buildings were titans of dark brick and stained granite, scraping at a sky the color of a bruised plum. They weren't like the sleek, gleaming skyscrapers of home, which were designed to be beautiful and inspiring. These buildings were designed to be intimidating, gargoyles with twisted, leering faces perched on cornices, their stone eyes seeming to follow the yellow cab as it crawled through the perpetual twilight of the canyon-like streets. Izuku, a boy who analyzed everything, found himself categorizing them not by height or function, but by how much they looked like they were waiting to pounce. "Isn't it something, Izuku?" his father, Hisashi Midoriya, said from the front passenger seat. His voice was a beacon of forced cheerfulness in the gloom. "This is one of the oldest parts of the city. Mr. Wayne's company is very dedicated to preserving the history." Hisashi worked in research and development, and this business trip, a consultation with the Applied Sciences Division of Wayne Enterprises, was the biggest opportunity of his career. He had been talking about it for months, his voice filled with an excitement that had, until recently, been infectious. "They look sad," Izuku mumbled, tracing the path of a raindrop as it zigzagged down the window. In the back seat beside him, his mother, Inko, squeezed his shoulder. Her touch was soft, worried. It had been worried for 3 weeks now, ever since the doctor with the kind eyes and the devastating news. "I'm sorry, kid. It's not going to happen," the words echoed in the quiet moments. Quirkless. A word that had felt like a death sentence. It had transformed his world from a vibrant comic book panel into a flat, monochrome page. Hisashi tried to fill the silence with optimism, and Inko tried to fill it with love, but Izuku could feel the truth of it like a missing limb. He was a broken toy in a world of wonders. He tightened his grip on the figure clutched in his other hand. It was a limited edition Silver Age All Might, its plastic muscles gleaming even in the dim light of the cab. The painted-on smile was a shield, a promise. All Might was born quirkless, some of the older theories on the forum said. Izuku clung to that rumor like a prayer. He would hold the figure and whisper All Might's catchphrase into its unmoving ear, a secret mantra. "Watashi jie kida. I am here." "We'll just be at the hotel for a little bit, sweetie," Inko said, her voice a gentle melody trying to cut through the city's droning bassline. "Then we can find a place that sells those American-style hamburgers you wanted to try. The ones with all the cheese." Izuku gave a small, non-committal nod. His appetite had vanished along with his quirk. The taxi pulled up to the Gotham Grand, a building that looked less like a hotel and more like a fortress with chandeliers. As Hisashi paid the driver, Inko helped Izuku out onto the rain-slicked pavement. A gust of wind funneled down the street, whipping his green-black hair into his eyes and carrying with it the distant, mournful cry of a police siren. It was a sound he was used to from home, but here it sounded different. Less like a call to action and more like a lament. "Right then," Hisashi said, pulling their suitcases from the trunk. "Let's get checked in. The meeting isn't until tomorrow morning, so tonight, Gotham is our oyster." He tried to sound like All Might, puffing out his chest, but the effect was dampened by the oppressive gloom. Izuku looked up. The sky was a ceiling of dense, gray cloud. He couldn't see the sun. He wondered if the sun ever truly came out in Gotham. A few hours later, the hamburger had been procured and mostly eaten. The novelty of the American fast food experience, the crinkly paper, the impossibly yellow cheese, the soda in a cup the size of his head, had managed to coax a genuine smile out of Izuku. For a little while, sitting in the brightly lit diner that felt like a lifeboat in an ocean of shadows, they were just a family on an exciting trip. Now, they were walking back to the hotel. The rain had softened to a fine, persistent mist that glittered in the neon signs of the few open shops. Hisashi, ever the adventurer, had suggested a shortcut. "The concierge said this way cuts right through to our street," he announced, gesturing toward a narrow passage between two towering brick buildings. "It's called Park Row, but everyone just calls it Crime Alley. A bit of a grim name, eh? Part of the local color." Inko hesitated at the mouth of the alley. It was darker than the street they were leaving, the mist thickening into a tangible fog that swirled around their ankles. The only light came from a single, flickering street lamp at the far end, casting long, dancing shadows. The air here tasted even more bitter. "Hisashi, maybe we should stick to the main road," she said, her hand tightening on Izuku's. "It feels... I don't know." "Oh, Inko, it's perfectly fine." He laughed, though it sounded a bit hollow. "It's famous. This is where the Waynes, well, it's a landmark. We're tourists. We have to see the landmarks." Izuku didn't know who the Waynes were, but he knew the feeling his mother was talking about. It was the feeling he got right before the bully Bakugo would round a corner. A prickling on the back of his neck, the world holding its breath. He held his all-might figure so tightly his knuckles were white. Reluctantly, Inko followed her husband into the alley. Their footsteps echoed, unnaturally loud. Water dripped from a rusty fire escape somewhere above, each drop a percussive beat in the tense silence. The walls were covered in faded graffiti, overlapping layers of names and symbols that felt like a language he couldn't understand. They were halfway through when the sound started. It wasn't a voice. It was a high-pitched, insectal whine, accompanied by a low, guttural chugging, like a lawnmower struggling to start. A strange orange light began to pulse at the far end of the alley, near the flickering street lamp. "What's that?" Inko whispered, pulling Izuku closer. Hisashi stepped in front of them, his earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by a rigid posture of pure animal fear. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low and tight. A figure emerged from the shadows, silhouetted against the growing orange glow. It was a man, but he looked all wrong. He was encased in a bulky, metallic suit, with a large tank strapped to his back. A helmet with round, bulbous lenses like a fly's eyes covered his head. In his hands he held a nozzle connected by a thick hose to the tank. The whining sound was coming from him. "Art should be immediate," the figure screeched, his voice distorted and tinny through a speaker on his helmet. "It should be cleansing. This city, this alley, it's a canvas choked with filth. It's time for a new coat of paint. A baptism by fire." The man, Firefly, wasn't a mugger looking for a wallet. He was a pyromaniac artist looking for a medium, and he had chosen this forgotten, miserable stretch of pavement for his masterpiece. Hisashi shoved Inko and Izuku back. "Run!" he screamed, but there was nowhere to run. The entrance to the alley was too far behind them, the exit blocked by the madman. With a roar, Firefly pulled the trigger on his nozzle. A torrent of liquid flame erupted, a geyser of incandescent orange that splashed against the far wall. The bricks sizzled and blackened instantly. The heat washed over them, a physical blow that stole the air from their lungs. Izuku screamed, a thin, terrified sound that was swallowed by the roar of the fire. "Get down!" Hisashi yelled, tackling his wife and son, pushing them toward the grimy brick wall, trying to shield them with his body. The world became a blur of motion and terror for Izuku. He felt the rough scrape of the wall against his cheek, the crushing weight of his father, the frantic, protective embrace of his mother. "I love you, Izuku." Inko sobbed into his hair, her body trembling violently. "Be a hero, be good." Another jet of fire erupted, closer this time. It wasn't aimed at them, not directly. Firefly was painting, sweeping his weapon in broad, destructive arcs. He was laughing, a high, unhinged cackle that echoed off the brick. A sheet of flame washed over a pile of trash bags nearby, and the stench of burning plastic and refuse filled the air. Hisashi pushed himself up slightly. "Stay here! Don't move!" he commanded, his voice cracking with terror. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Please! We have a child, just let us go. We won't say anything." Firefly swiveled his insect-like head toward them. His electronic voice was laced with derision. More filth. You contaminate the canvas. You are part of the ugliness that must be purged. He aimed the nozzle. What happened next was a series of horrifying, disjointed snapshots burned into Izuku's memory. His father, screaming a wordless challenge and charging forward, a desperate, hopeless act of paternal protection. A stream of fire, impossibly bright, engulfing his father's running form. His mother's shriek of pure agony, a sound that would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his life. The sickening smell of burnt fabric and something else, something far worse. Inko, without a moment's hesitation, threw herself over Izuku, becoming a living shield. Her body pressed him into the cold, wet ground, her arms wrapped around his head, muffling his view. He could feel the frantic, hammering beat of her heart against his back. "A hero!" he whimpered, his face buried in the damp fabric of her coat. "Will come and save us." It was what they always said in the cartoons. It was the promise of his world. He felt a shudder rack his mother's body, a final, convulsive tremor. Her grip on him went slack. The hammering of her heart stopped. Silence. The roar of the flamethrower was gone. The insane laughter had ceased. The only sounds were the crackling of the small fires dotting the alley and the steady, indifferent drip of water from the fire escape. Izuku lay there for a second, a minute, an eternity. The weight of his mother was heavy, and strangely cold. He pushed, squirming out from under her. He sat up. The alley was wreathed in smoke and steam. His father was a dark shape on the ground a few meters away, unnaturally still. His mother lay beside him, her back horribly scorched. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. Her pearl necklace, a gift from Hisashi, had snapped, and the small white beads were scattered across the grimy pavement like fallen teeth. Izuku's mind refused to process it. It was a movie. A bad dream. It wasn't real. He looked at his hands. They were scraped and dirty. He looked for his all-might figure. It lay near his mother's outstretched hand, its heroic smile a grotesque mockery in the face of the carnage. A single, ragged sob escaped his lips. Then another. He didn't scream. The sound was trapped in his throat, a solid ball of ice. He just sat there, a small, green-haired island in a sea of tragedy, the mist swirling around him. He began to whisper, the words tumbling out, nonsensical, a desperate plea to a universe that had just proven itself deaf. A hero will come. All Might will. He always saves everyone with a smile. He's the strongest. A hero will come and save us. He was still whispering when a new shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness at the mouth of the alley. It was tall, broad, and utterly silent. It moved with a liquid grace that defied its size, its long, tattered cape stirring the fog like a phantom's breath. Two stark white lenses gleamed from within a horned cowl, and they fixed on the small, broken figure of the boy. Batman had arrived. Too late. For Bruce Wayne, Crime Alley was a wound that never healed. Every time he entered it, he was 8 years old again. He could smell the gunpowder, hear the shatter of his mother's pearls, feel the cold dread that had hollowed him out and remade him. Tonight was no different. Gordon had called it in, an unsanctioned burn by Garfield Linz. A sideshow, but a messy one. He landed on the rooftop above, a whisper of displaced air. His senses, honed by years of war in these streets, took in the scene below. Linz was already gone, of course. The arsonist was a coward who fled after his first match was struck. The GCPD sirens were approaching, but they were still blocks away. Below him was the aftermath. The scorch marks, the lingering smell of accelerant. The two bodies, and the boy. His analytical mind catalogued the details first. Male, approximately 6 years old. Green-black hair. Signs of shock, but physically unharmed. He was positioned between the two adult victims, his parents clearly. The protective positioning was unmistakable. A textbook case of parental sacrifice. The city was built on such tragedies. He dropped into the alley, his cape wrapping around him as he landed without a sound. He was a creature of the night, a specter. He expected the boy to scream. Most did, but the boy didn't seem to notice him. He was rocking back and forth, his eyes wide and unfocused, fixed on the body of the woman. And he was muttering, "A hero will come, he'll make it better, a hero is supposed to." The words hit Batman harder than any physical blow. They were words of faith, of hope. Words that had no place in this blood-soaked alley. They were the words of a child from another world, a world where heroes were real and dependable, where they arrived on time. Bruce's gaze drifted from the boy to the woman. Inko. He could see the scorch marks on her back, the way she had clearly thrown herself over her son. His eyes fell on the scattered pearls glinting in the faint light. A string of pearls, breaking, scattering across the pavement like fallen stars. The memory slammed into him. The past and present collapsed into a single, agonizing moment. For a heartbeat, he wasn't Batman, the stoic Dark Knight. He was Bruce Wayne, the orphan of Crime Alley, watching another child's world end in the exact same way his had. The same senseless violence. The same stolen future. The same sudden, crushing loneliness. But there was a difference. When Bruce's world ended, he had been consumed by rage and a thirst for vengeance. This boy, this tiny survivor, was clinging to something else. He was clinging to the idea of heroes. It was a belief so pure, so alien to this place, that it felt like a flickering candle in a hurricane. He took a slow step forward. The boy's head snapped up, and his eyes, large, green, and swimming with a terror so profound it was almost sublime, finally focused on him. Izuku flinched back, scrambling away until his back hit the cold brick wall. He stared up at the immense, horned silhouette. This wasn't All Might. This wasn't a hero from his cartoons. This was a monster born of the same shadows that had just consumed his family. Batman knelt, a painful cracking of joints inside his armored suit. The motion was deliberate, an attempt to make himself smaller, less threatening. It didn't work. He was still a mountain of black Kevlar, and barely suppressed violence. He tried to soften his voice, forcing the gravelly, intimidating rasp of the bat into something approaching gentle. It felt foreign in his own throat. "It's okay," he said. The words were inadequate, insulting. "You're safe now." Izuku just stared, trembling, his small hands clutching the All Might figure he had retrieved. He held it up like a crucifix against the vampire, a tiny bastion of color and hope against the encroaching darkness. The wail of sirens grew closer, washing the alley in strobing red and blue lights that made the scene even more surreal. Commissioner James Gordon was the first through the police tape, his trench coat flapping, his face etched with a familiar weariness. "Oh God!" Gordon breathed, taking in the bodies, the boy, and the bat. "Linz?" He fled. Batman grunted, his voice returning to its normal register. He didn't take his eyes off Izuku. "The victims? I'll have CSU run the plates on their rental when it turns up. Tourists by the look of them," Gordon said, his voice heavy. He knelt a safe distance away, his expression full of a practiced, professional sympathy. "Hey there, son. I'm Commissioner Gordon. We're going to help you." Izuku didn't respond. He just stared at Batman, this impossible creature of the night. The man who was supposed to be a hero, but who had arrived too late. The paradox was too much for his shattered mind. "He's in shock," Batman stated, the detective returning to the fore. "We need to get him out of here." "Child Services," Gordon sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah. They'll place him in a temporary shelter until we can find next of kin. Foreign nationals, this is going to be a bureaucratic nightmare." "Poor kid, a temporary shelter. A sterile, uncaring building full of other broken children. He'd be a case file, a number. Another piece of flotsam in Gotham's storm drain." Bruce looked at the boy, at the fierce, desperate way he clutched that cheap plastic doll. He saw the flicker of belief in his eyes, a belief that this city did its best to systematically extinguish in everyone it touched. It had extinguished Bruce's own belief long ago, replacing it with cold, hard resolve. And in that moment, an idea took root in Bruce Wayne's soul. It was not a logical idea. It was not practical. Alfred would call it reckless, perhaps even cruel. But it was undeniable. He had spent his life, his fortune, his very being, fighting a war against the thing that created him. His war was one of fear, of shadows, of punching the city's evil back into the dark. But what if there was another way? What if you didn't just fight the darkness, but you also shielded the light? He couldn't save his own parents. He couldn't save his 8-year-old self from the trauma that would define him. But maybe he could save this boy, not just his life, but the fragile, impossible thing he still held on to. No, Batman said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Gordon blinked. No? What do you mean, no? We have to. I'll take him. The commissioner stared as if Batman had just sprouted a second head. You'll what? You can't be serious. You can't just take a kid. There are procedures. Laws. Bruce Wayne will handle it. Batman clarified, the distinction crucial. He has connections. He can cut through the red tape with the Japanese consulate. He will sponsor the boy, ensure his well-being until his family is located. It will be faster, more efficient. And better for him than a city shelter. Gordon was stunned into silence for a moment. He looked from the terrifying vigilante to the traumatized child and back again. He had known Batman for years, had seen him display cold fury, tactical genius, and grim determination. He had never, not once, seen him do this. Why? Gordon finally asked, the question hanging heavy in the damp air. Batman's gaze was fixed on Izuku. He saw the scattered pearls. He heard the echo of a child's faith. His answer was quiet, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of pain. He's a victim of my city, Batman said. That makes him my responsibility. He moved toward Izuku, who flinched again. Gently, almost reverently, Batman reached down and wrapped the boy in his thick, Kevlar-lined cape. He lifted the child, who was surprisingly light. Izuku was too deep in shock to struggle. He just trembled, burying his face in the strange-smelling fabric, his small hands still clutching his hero. Get a blanket from one of the uniforms, Batman ordered Gordon. And find out their names. As Gordon relayed the orders, Batman stood there, a dark pieta in the heart of Crime Alley, holding the orphan of the night's latest tragedy. He felt the boy's small, shuddering breaths against his chest plate. It was a fragile, terrifying weight. The weight of a life. The weight of a soul. The ride to the manor was silent. Bruce had used a nondescript black sedan parked several blocks away, not the Batmobile. Izuku was wrapped in a thick wool police blanket, asleep now, his small body finally succumbing to the overwhelming trauma and exhaustion. His face, in sleep, had lost the look of terror, replaced now by a deep, hollowed-out sadness. His tear tracks were pale lines on his grimy cheeks. The all-might figure had fallen from his slack grasp and now lay on the passenger seat between them, its plastic smile catching the passing streetlights. Bruce drove, his hands tied on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. The decision, made on instinct and raw emotion in the alley, was now settling into a cold, hard reality in his mind. What had he done? He was a creature of vengeance and solitude. His home was a museum of pain, not a place for a child. His life was a nocturnal war. To bring a child into that, it was selfish. It was dangerous. He was condemning this boy to a life in the shadow of the Bat. Yet, the alternative, letting Gotham's indifferent system swallow him whole, letting that spark of hope be snuffed out by bureaucracy and neglect, that felt like a greater sin. It felt like letting the mugger win all over again. He pulled through the hidden entrance and into the cavernous space of the Batcave. The car's engine died, and the silence was broken only by the drip of water from the stone ceiling and the low, constant hum of the Bat-computer. He sat there for a long moment, looking at the sleeping boy. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the whole city, he got out, gently lifted Izuku from the seat, and carried him toward the elevator that led up into the manor. The grandfather clocks slid aside, and he stepped into the familiar opulence of Wayne Manor's study. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, orange glow that was the antithesis of the fire in the alley. Alfred Pennyworth was waiting for him, a silver tray with a steaming mug on it held in his steady hands. His expression was, as always, a perfect mask of polite inquiry, but his eyes, sharp and knowing, saw everything. They saw the dirt and grime on the bat suit, the exhaustion on Bruce's face, and the small, blanket-wrapped child cradled in his master's arms. Alfred didn't ask what had happened. He already knew, or could surmise. He simply raised a single, eloquent eyebrow. "Another stray, Master Bruce?" he asked, his voice dry but laced with an undercurrent of deep concern. He had seen this before. With Dick Grayson. With Jason Todd. Bruce had a habit of collecting orphans forged in the same crucible as himself. Bruce looked down at the child in his arms. Izuku's face was peaceful, his breathing deep and even. His green hair was a splash of vibrant life against the drab wool of the blanket. He looked impossibly small, impossibly fragile. This wasn't a street-smart acrobat or a hardened street kid. This was a child whose faith was so strong he had tried to summon a hero with whispered words. "This one's different, Alfred," Bruce said, his voice low and raw. He walked past the butler and toward the grand staircase. "The others had their hope beaten out of them long before I found them. They learned to survive in the dark." He paused at the foot of the stairs and looked back at his oldest friend, his guardian. "This one," Bruce finished, his gaze returning to the sleeping face of Izuku Midoriya. "Still believes in the sun." Alfred watched him ascend the stairs, the dark night carrying a fragile spark of light into the heart of his lonely darkness. And for the first time in a long time, the ever-loyal butler felt a tremor of something he could not quite name. It was not hope, not yet. But it was not despair either. It was simply the beginning of something new. And in Gotham, anything new was a dangerous thing indeed. The dream always began the same way, with the taste of wet stone and the smell of burned sugar. For 8 years, it had been his unwelcome nightly companion. It wasn't a replay of the events, not anymore. His mind, in a small act of mercy, had blurred the specifics into a nightmarish watercolor of orange and black. Now, the dream was about the feeling. It was the rough scrape of brick against his cheek, the crushing, final weight of his mother's body, and the sound of pearls scattering like tiny, broken teeth on the pavement. He would wake up not with a scream, but with a silent, suffocating pressure in his chest, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles ached. Izuku Midoriya sat up in bed, the silk sheets pulling around his waist. He was 14 years old. His room was a study in contrasts. It was cavernous, larger than his family's entire apartment in Yuzurifu had been, with a vaulted ceiling and a massive bay window that overlooked the manicured, mist-shrouded lawns of the Wayne estate. A king-sized bed, a walk-in closet full of clothes he rarely wore, and shelves lined with books on every conceivable subject, from classical literature to advanced theoretical physics. It was a gilded cage, and he was acutely aware of the gold. The pressure in his chest remained. He swung his legs out of bed and padded across the plush Persian rug to the window. Outside, the Gotham dawn was breaking, which meant the perpetual gray of the sky was simply turning a slightly lighter shade of gray. There was no sun, just a diffuse, melancholy light that filtered through the ancient trees. He was fluent in English now, his Japanese reserved for quiet conversations with Alfred or for the muttered notes he'd scribbled to himself. He was an honors student at Gotham Academy, a place where the children of the city's elite learned to network and posture. He was polite, quiet, and intensely observant. His teachers called him brilliant but withdrawn. His classmates saw him as the strange, quiet charity case of the illustrious Bruce Wayne. They weren't entirely wrong. He was haunted. Haunted by the alley. Haunted by the hero who never came. And haunted by the dark, terrifying creature that did. After a quick, cold shower, he dressed in his school uniform, gray trousers, a white button-down shirt, and a navy blazer with the Gotham Academy crest over the heart. He looked in the mirror. A pale, slender boy stared back. His face was a constellation of faint freckles, and his unruly mop of green-black hair refused to be tamed, sticking up in defiant tufts. But it was his eyes that held the story of the last 8 years. They were large and green, but the bright, innocent spark of his childhood had been banked, replaced by an analytical fire that was far too old for his face. It was the gaze of someone who didn't just look at the world, but systematically disassembled it. He made his way downstairs. The manor was quiet, a vast museum of echoing footsteps and shadowed corners. In the dining room, a table that could comfortably seat 30 was set for 3. Alfred Pennyworth, immaculate in his suit, was pouring orange juice. Bruce Wayne sat at the head of the table, already halfway through a cup of black coffee, a tablet propped up in front of him displaying stock market data. "Good morning, Master Izuku," Alfred said, his voice a warm, steady anchor in the morning gloom. "Sleep well?" It was a ritual, Alfred always asked. Izuku always gave the same answer. Yes, thank you, Alfred. He lied, taking his seat. Bruce grunted a morning greeting without looking up from his tablet. Their relationship was a strange and delicate thing. Bruce was his guardian, his benefactor, the man who had plucked him from the wreckage of his life. He had provided everything: shelter, education, security. But he was also a monument of emotional distance. He was a presence, a provider, but not a father. The warmth in the house, the guidance, the quiet comfort, that all came from Alfred. Bruce provided the training. You have your trig midterm today, correct? Bruce asked, his eyes still on the screen. Yes, Bruce, Izuku replied, buttering a piece of toast. And your sparring session is at 4. Don't be late. We're working on counter throws for larger opponents. I won't. This was the rhythm of their life. Mundane daytime obligations and the strange, intense physical regimen Bruce insisted upon. For years Bruce had been training him. It had started simply, with gymnastics and basic self-defense, framed as building confidence. But it had escalated. Now, their sessions in the Manor's state-of-the-art gymnasium were grueling. They covered a dozen different martial arts, from Krav Maga to ninjutsu. They included parkour, stealth exercises, and escape artistry. Alongside the physical, Bruce drilled him in the academic, criminology, forensic science, deductive reasoning. He would present Izuku with complex case files, old, unsolved crimes from GCPD's archives, and demand a full workup. Bruce never explained why. The stated reason was always self-reliance or discipline. But Izuku, the boy who analyzed everything, knew there was more to it. You don't teach a boy how to dislocate his own thumb to escape a pair of handcuffs just for discipline. You are preparing him for a cage. The silence at the table stretched, broken only by the clink of silverware. Izuku glanced at the television mounted on the wall, which was muted and tuned to a global news network. The Chirin read, Endeavor foils major terror plot in Tokyo. The screen showed Japan's number 2 hero, a man wreathed in brilliant flame, standing triumphantly amidst the wreckage. A crowd was cheering, their faces filled with awe and gratitude. It was a scene of bright, bombastic heroism. Izuku felt a familiar pang in his chest, a ghost of an old dream. They're so public, Izuku said quietly, almost to himself. Bruce finally looked up from his tablet, his blue eyes sharp and discerning. Who? The heroes. In Japan, Izuku clarified, gesturing with his fork. They hold press conferences. They have approval ratings. They're celebrities. Symbols. Bruce took a slow sip of his coffee. They're government employees, Izuku. It's a different system. A system that works for them. The unspoken addendum hung in the air, but it would never work here. But it gives people hope. Izuku pressed, the argument a familiar one between them. When people see someone like Endeavor, or All Might, they feel safe. They feel inspired. A hero should inspire hope, not just. He trailed off, catching himself. He was about to say fear. Hope is a luxury, Izuku, Bruce said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. It doesn't stop a man with a gun and nothing to lose. It doesn't talk a psychopath down from a ledge. In a perfect world, hope would be the ultimate weapon. Gotham is not a perfect world, but isn't that the goal? Izuku argued, his voice gaining a bit of passion. To try and make it one? To give people a symbol to believe in so they don't have to be afraid all the time? Fear is corrosive. It's a poison. Bruce set his coffee cup down with a definitive click. His gaze was intense. Fear is a tool. It is a rational response to a dangerous world. It keeps you alive. It can be used to control, but it can also be used to protect. When a criminal is afraid to pull the trigger because of who might be waiting for him in the shadows, that's a victory. A silent one. An ugly one, but a victory nonetheless. Hope doesn't stop a bullet. Fear sometimes does. The conversation ended there, as it always did. They were two planets in different orbits, their paths crossing but never aligning. Bruce saw the world through the grim lens of Crime Alley. Izuku, despite everything, was still looking at it through the memory of an All Might video, a world where a smiling hero could make everything okay. Alfred quietly cleared their plates. Your bus will be here in 15 minutes, Master Izuku. Best not to be tardy. Izuku nodded, excused himself, and went to his room to gather his school things. But before he packed his trig textbook, he opened the bottom drawer of his desk. It was locked, but the lock was a simple one he could pick in under 3 seconds, a skill Bruce had inadvertently taught him. Inside were not comics or magazines, but a stack of composition notebooks. They were identical to the ones he'd had as a child, but their contents were vastly different. He pulled one out. The cover read, in neat, blocky English, Gotham Criminal Vigilante Analysis, Volume 14. He flipped it open. The notebooks were his real education. His true obsession. They were a direct evolution of his childhood hero analysis for the future, but the subject matter had been twisted by the crucible of Gotham. The cheerful, colorful drawings of heroes had been replaced by stark, anatomical sketches, psychological flowcharts, and complex tactical diagrams. He turned to a page on the Joker. It wasn't a simple profile. It was a sprawling, multi-page treatise titled, Chaos Theory and the Comedic Structure, an analysis of Joker's event patterns. It detailed how Joker's attacks often followed the structure of a 3-act joke: the pledge, the setup, often a public threat, the turn, the twist, where the initial threat is a misdirection for the real target, and the prestige, the punchline, the final act of horrifying, anarchic violence. Izuku had cross-referenced news reports, police files, and witness testimonies, creating a predictive model. Note: he'd scribbled in the margin, punchline efficacy is directly proportional to the subversion of the audience's, i.e. Batman's, expectations. To counter, one must ignore the joke and focus on the mechanics of its delivery. He flipped a few more pages. A detailed chemical breakdown of Scarecrow's various fear toxins, complete with speculative molecular structures for potential universal antidotes. He'd cross-referenced the known chemical components with shipping manifests from chemical plants that had been robbed over the last 5 years. There was a diagram of the Gotham City sewer system, with potential routes for Mr. Freeze to transport his cryogenic technology undetected. But his most detailed, most obsessive analysis was reserved for Gotham's apex predator, subject Batman. He had pages dedicated to the Dark Knight. He treated him not as a hero or a villain, but as a force of nature to be studied. A phenomenon. There was a section on his fighting style. Primary base, Kisi fighting method, supplemented with Krav Maga for aggression, ninjutsu for stealth/disarmament, and boxing for raw power, over-reliance on counterattacks. Predictable opening gambit against armed opponents, batarang to disarm, followed by smoke pellet to disorient, then close quarters takedown. Vulnerability. Tends to absorb initial blows to gauge opponent's strength, a high-risk strategy against metahuman-level strength. Next to it was a sketch of the bat suit, with notes on the composition of the armor plating, the tensile strength of the cape, and the likely power source for the cowl's electronics. Kevlar titanium weave is resistant to small arms fire but vulnerable to high-caliber armor-piercing rounds and serrated blades at the joints, neck, shoulders, hips. He analyzed Batman's psychology with a chilling detachment. Operates on a foundation of controlled trauma. Motivation appears to be a pathological obsession with preventing a specific past event, likely the loss of parents via street crime, a common Gotham archetype. This creates an inflexible moral code, no-killing rule, which is both his greatest strength, moral high ground, and greatest weakness, allows for recidivism of his most dangerous foes. He is an island. He relies on no one. This is a tactical vulnerability. This was Izuku's secret world. A world where he took the chaos and terror that had shattered his life and tried to impose order upon it. If he could understand it, if he could break it down into its component parts, then maybe it couldn't hurt him. Maybe he could control it. He carefully placed the notebook back in the drawer, locked it, and headed out to catch his bus, the ghost of his argument with Bruce still fresh in his mind. That evening, after school and before his sparring session, Izuku retreated to the one place in the manor that felt truly his, the library. It was 2 stories high, with rolling ladders and the comforting smell of old paper and leather. He navigated to a secluded corner, opened his laptop, and put on a pair of headphones. He didn't pull up his homework. He navigated to a heavily encrypted folder nested deep within his hard drive. The password was a string of Japanese characters, Watashi J. Kita. The folder contained dozens of video files. Old, grainy news reports, TV specials, and pirated documentaries, all from Japan. All about one man, All Might. A video started playing. It was the hero's debut, a legendary event Izuku had watched 1,000 times. A massive disaster, a burning building, hundreds of people trapped. Then, emerging from the smoke, carrying a dozen people on his back, was the towering figure of All Might. He was young, his costume was slightly different, but the power, the presence, was unmistakable. He turned to the camera, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, and gave his signature, world-shaking smile. "It's fine now!" His voice boomed from the laptop speakers. "Why?" "Because I am here." The raw, unadulterated hope in that scene was a physical force. It was sunlight. It was everything Gotham was not. This was his secret ritual, his private rebellion. In this dark, cynical city, under the roof of a man who believed only in fear and pragmatism, Izuku secretly clung to the memory of what a hero was supposed to be. He watched the video, a profound sadness welling up inside him. This was the man he had idolized. This was the dream he had lost. His quirklessness had made this path impossible, but it was the cold, hard reality of Gotham that had truly killed the dream. How could a hero smile like that in a city that chewed up and spat out hope for breakfast? He felt a tear slide down his cheek. He wiped it away angrily. Crying was a useless quirk. It solved nothing. He closed the laptop, the hero's triumphant laugh echoing in his head, a sound from another universe. It was time for his training. The gym was less a gym and more a private warfare development center. It had padded floors, a boxing ring, a climbing wall that mimicked the brickwork of Gotham's tenements, and an array of training equipment that ranged from simple weights to complex, automated combat drones. Bruce was waiting for him, stripped to a gray t-shirt and sweats. Even in his civilian attire, he moved with a dangerous economy of motion. "You're late," Bruce said. It was not a question. Izuku was exactly 4 minutes late. "I apologize. I lost track of time," Izuku said, bowing his head slightly in a gesture that was more Japanese than Gothamite. "The world doesn't wait, Izuku," Bruce said, tossing him a pair of practice staffs. "Your opponent won't care if you lose track of time. Get ready." For the next hour, they sparred. It was a brutal, elegant dance. Izuku was fast, fluid, and impossibly agile. His small frame, which would be a disadvantage in a pure strength contest, became an asset. He weaved and dodged, using his opponent's momentum against him, just as Bruce had taught him. His analytical mind was working constantly, processing Bruce's movements, predicting his attacks, looking for the fractional openings. Bruce was relentless. He was stronger, more experienced, a force of nature. He wasn't fighting Izuku as a guardian training a child. He was fighting him as a veteran assessing a recruit. He pressed every advantage, exploited every tiny mistake. He swept Izuku's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the mat. "Too slow," Bruce grunted, standing over him. "You anticipated the sweep, but your counter was half a second behind your thought. Your body has to be as fast as your brain." Izuku pushed himself up, his chest heaving. "Yes, sir." Again, they went on. Bruce switched tactics, becoming a brawler, forcing Izuku to deal with raw, overwhelming force. Izuku adapted, shifting from defensive blocks to quick, precise strikes aimed at nerve clusters and joints, painful, debilitating blows designed to neutralize a larger foe. He managed to land a sharp jab to the side of Bruce's knee, earning a grunt of surprise from his mentor. The opening was all Izuku needed. He hooked his leg around Bruce's, dropped his center of gravity, and executed a perfect counter throw. For a split second, he had him, but Bruce was Bruce. Mid-fall, he twisted his body with impossible control, landed on his hands, and used the momentum to spring back, his leg lashing out in a powerful kick that Izuku barely managed to block with his forearm. The impact sent a painful jolt all the way to his shoulder. The match was over. Izuku stood, rubbing his arm, breathing heavily. He had lost, as he always did. But he had gotten closer this time. Bruce gave a curt nod, a rare and significant sign of approval. "Your analysis of a situation is your greatest weapon. But analysis is useless without execution. We'll work on closing that gap." Go shower. Alfred will have dinner ready. As Izuku left the gym, nursing his bruised arm and his bruised pride, he had no idea that Bruce's mind was not on the spar. It was on their conversation from that morning, on the boy's stubborn, infuriating, and perhaps foolish idealism. Bruce walked over to a terminal, his face grim. He worried he was breaking the boy, reforging him into a weapon just like himself. But what was the alternative? To leave him soft and unprepared for the reality of this world? To let Gotham claim him as it had claimed so many others? He felt a familiar guilt gnawing at him. He was a hypocrite. He lectured Izuku on the futility of hope while his entire crusade as Batman was, in itself, a desperate, irrational act of hope. The hope that he could, through fear and violence, make it so that no other 8-year-old boy would have to kneel in an alley next to his murdered parents. Later that night, long after Izuku was asleep, Bruce found himself standing outside the boy's room. He was restless, the conversation at the breakfast table still bothering him. He was worried about Izuku's mental state, that his quietness was a mask for a deeper despair. On a hunch, he entered the room, moving with the silence of a ghost. He saw the desk, the simple lock on the bottom drawer. It was an amateurish lock, one a child would use. Bruce could have bypassed it in an instant, but he felt a pang of guilt at the thought of invading the boy's privacy. Still, the need to understand, to ensure the boy was safe, overrode his hesitation. He knelt and, with a practiced touch, manipulated the tumblers. The drawer clicked open. He expected a diary. Teenage angst. Maybe even sketches of heroes from Japan. He did not expect to find a meticulously organized arsenal of intelligence. He pulled out the top notebook. Gotham Criminal Vigilante Analysis, Volume 14. He opened it. His eyes widened. He scanned the pages, his mind reeling. The depth, the detail, the chillingly accurate psychological profiles. It was beyond anything he could have imagined. This wasn't a hobby. This was professional-grade intelligence analysis. The boy had been studying his entire world, his entire life, with the detached precision of a master strategist. Then, Bruce found the section he was dreading and seeking all at once. The analysis of Batman. He read Izuku's notes on his fighting style, his gadgets, his motivations. He felt a cold dread mixed with a staggering sense of pride. The boy saw him. Not as a monster, not as a savior, but as a system to be understood and, if necessary, defeated. He turned the page and froze. It was a detailed breakdown of a patrol from 3 nights ago. A pursuit of the Clue Master through the industrial district. Bruce remembered it vividly. He'd cornered the villain in a narrow access corridor between 2 warehouses. Clue Master had fired a wild shot, and the ricochet had grazed Bruce's shoulder pauldron. A minor injury, a non-event. But not to Izuku. On the page was a perfect, hand-drawn schematic of the corridor. Dotted lines indicated Batman's trajectory. Another line showed the bullet's path. Below the diagram, Izuku's neat, analytical script read, Incident, 2247, Clue Master apprehension. Subject B sustained minor impact from 9mm ricochet. Cause, tactical error. The confined vertical space necessitated a rapid ascent via grapple line. Deployment from standard belt holster resulted in a 0.3-second delay between unholstering and firing, creating a window of vulnerability. Opponent's chaotic firing pattern made this delay statistically significant. A correctable flaw. Bruce's blood ran cold. He had dismissed the hit as bad luck. Izuku had correctly identified it as a systemic weakness in his own equipment and technique. But it was the next page that truly took his breath away. It was a design schematic. A new gadget. Izuku had drawn a detailed rendering of Batman's gauntlet, but with a modification. A compact, wrist-mounted auxiliary grapple launcher. The notes beside it were precise. Proposed solution: wrist-mounted auxiliary launcher for rapid deployment in close quarters or while primary hands are engaged. Firing mechanism integrated with finger flexion sensors. Reduces deployment delay to 0.1 seconds. Allows for simultaneous use of primary gadgets, e.g., batarang, and evasive maneuvering. Power source can be tied into the suit's primary capacitor. It was brilliant. It was elegant. It was a solution he and Lucius Fox had never considered. The boy hadn't just identified the problem. He had solved it. He had analyzed the Batman and, in his own quiet way, had improved him. Bruce carefully closed the notebook and placed it back in the drawer, locking it just as he had found it. He stood up, his mind a maelstrom of thoughts. The training. The arguments. The years of shaping and molding. He had been trying to protect Izuku from the world. He had been trying to prepare him for survival. He now realized he had been thinking too small. He hadn't been forging a survivor. He had been tempering a weapon. A partner. He looked at the sleeping boy, at the face that was still so young, yet held an intellect and a quiet strength that was staggering. The conflict between All Might's idealism and Gotham's pragmatism wasn't a weakness in Izuku. It was the source of his unique perspective. He had the heart of a hero and the mind of a detective. Bruce walked out of the room and stood in the dark hallway of his empty mansion. The decision he had made in Crime Alley 8 years ago, the one born of grief and a flicker of pity, had led him here. The path forward was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. He couldn't protect Izuku from the shadows by keeping him in the light. He had to bring him into the dark. He had to show him the truth. He had to take him to the cave. "Alfred," he said into his comlink, his voice low and resolute. "Get the main elevator ready." A pause, then the butler's calm voice replied. "For you, sir?" Bruce looked back at Izuku's closed door. "For us." The silence in Wayne Manor was a living entity. Izuku had learned its language over 8 years. The gentle sigh of the ancient heating system, the groan of old wood settling, the distant, mournful cry of the wind whistling through the eaves. But this silence was different. It was heavy, charged, and followed him like a shadow from the moment he came downstairs for breakfast. Bruce was already at the dining table, but for once, the tablet and the stock reports were absent. He was simply nursing a cup of black coffee, his gaze distant, as if he were looking at something far beyond the rain-streaked windows. Alfred served Izuku his oatmeal with his usual quiet efficiency, but there was a tension in his posture, a subtle rigidity that Izuku's hyper-observant eyes couldn't miss. Something was wrong, or, more accurately, something was about to change. "Izuku," Bruce said, his voice cutting through the quiet. It lacked its usual morning brusqueness. It was measured, deliberate. "There will be no school for you today." Izuku paused, his spoon halfway to his mouth. "Is there a reason?" "My trig midterm. I've already spoken with Headmaster Crane." "You've been excused," Bruce stated, his gaze finally meeting Izuku's across the vast expanse of the mahogany table. His blue eyes were like chips of ice, but there was an unfamiliar emotion flickering in their depths. It looked like resolve, but it was tinged with something else. Apprehension. "Alfred has your training gear ready," Bruce continued, rising from his chair. "Meet me in the study when you're done." He didn't wait for a reply. He simply turned and left, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Izuku looked at Alfred, his unspoken question hanging in the air. The old butler's face was a mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes offered a sliver of sympathy. "Some lessons, Master Izuku," Alfred said softly, "are not found in textbooks. I suggest you eat. You will need your strength." The words, meant to be reassuring, only heightened the knot of anxiety in Izuku's stomach. He quickly finished his breakfast and changed into the durable, black training fatigues he wore for his sessions with Bruce. As he walked toward the study, his mind raced, cycling through possibilities. Was this a new, more intense phase of his training? A test? His analysis of Bruce's behavior suggested a paradigm shift. A significant event was imminent. He was not wrong. He found Bruce standing before the grand, imposing fireplace in the study. He was staring at the portrait of his parents, Thomas and Martha Wayne, that hung above the mantelpiece. They smiled down with the placid, unknowing grace of the long dead. "Do you know what this room represents, Izuku?" Bruce asked without turning around. "It's your study," Izuku answered, stating the obvious. "It is my father's study," Bruce corrected, his voice resonating with a deep, ancestral weight. Everything in this house was his. The company, the fortune, the name. He was a good man. A healer. He believed in this city. He believed he could fix its broken bones, cure its diseases. He was a symbol of hope. Bruce turned, and the look on his face was one Izuku had never seen before. It was a raw, unguarded grief, a wound that 8 years of living with the man had only allowed him to glimpse in fragmented moments. But hope wasn't enough, Bruce said, his voice a low growl. A scalpel can't excise the kind of cancer that plagues Gotham. My father tried to save this city in the light. He failed. He walked over to the grandfather clock that stood sentinel in the corner of the room, its pendulum swinging in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. It was an antique, a priceless heirloom. Izuku had always been told not to touch it. Bruce reached out and moved the clock's hands. He set them to 10:47, the time of his parents' death. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan of protesting gears and a soft hiss of pneumatics, the entire grandfather clock swung inward, revealing not a wall, but a dark, gaping maw. A cold, damp draft, smelling of deep earth and ozone, spilled into the warm, wood-paneled study. A narrow, spiraling staircase, lit by stark industrial lights, descended into the blackness. Izuku stared, his breath caught in his throat. His analytical mind, which usually raced to deconstruct and understand, was stunned into momentary silence. This was impossible. A secret passage, a trope from Gothic novels and spy movies, made real in the foundations of the house he had lived in for nearly a decade. My father's legacy is upstairs, Bruce said, his voice echoing slightly from the hidden opening. The light. The hope. The failure. He gestured toward the descending stairs. My work is down here. He turned and started down the steps without looking back, a silent command for Izuku to follow. Hesitantly, Izuku approached the opening. He could feel the temperature drop, the air growing heavy and cool. He took a deep breath, the scent of the cave filling his lungs, and plunged into the darkness after Bruce. The spiral staircase opened onto a small, reinforced steel elevator. It was purely functional, a stark contrast to the polished brass and mahogany lift in the main house. They stepped inside, and the doors slid shut with a solid, definitive thud that felt like a cell door locking. The elevator descended. It didn't just go down a floor or two. It plummeted, a smooth, silent drop deep into the bedrock beneath the manor. Izuku's ears popped. He felt a tremor of something he hadn't felt since that night in the alley. It wasn't just fear. It was awe. The awe of confronting something vast and incomprehensible. The elevator doors opened, and Izuku's world tilted on its axis. He was standing on a metal gantry overlooking a cavern of impossible scale. It was a natural cave, vast and cathedral-like, its ceiling lost in shadow far above, where stalactites hung like the teeth of some great, sleeping beast. The air hummed with the steady thrum of immense power generators and the chorus of thousands of chittering, unseen bats. Waterfalls cascaded down the rock faces, feeding into a subterranean river that snaked through the cavern floor. And in the center of it all, illuminated by the cold, white light of massive computer monitors, was the arsenal, the Batmobile. It sat on a central turntable, a beast of black armor plating and brutal angles, looking less like a car and more like a high-velocity siege weapon. Nearby, on other platforms, were a sleek, aerodynamic jet, the Batwing, and a collection of motorcycles, each modified for urban warfare. A massive computer array, the Bat computer, dominated one wall. Its central screen was larger than a cinema screen, displaying a complex, rotating 3D map of Gotham City. Dozens of smaller screens flickered with data streams, police scanners, satellite imagery, forensic analyses, news feeds from around the globe. Workstations were laden with arcane technology, spectrum analyzers, holographic projectors, and tools Izuku couldn't begin to name. Display cases lined one wall, containing an armory of gadgets, rows upon rows of razor-sharp batarangs, smoke pellets, explosive gels, and the iconic grappling gun. Izuku's mind, finally rebooting from the initial shock, went into analytical overdrive. He wasn't just seeing a secret lair, he was seeing the logistical heart of a private war. The cost, the RD, the power consumption alone must be astronomical. The sheer force of what required to build this, to maintain it, to operate it in secret, it was beyond comprehension. His eyes scanned the cavern, connecting the dots with a speed that was almost painful. The late nights Bruce called business trips. The unexplained injuries Alfred would discreetly tend to. The immense, and often secretive, expenditures of Wayne Enterprises Applied Sciences Division. The way Bruce would sometimes stare into the middle distance, his mind clearly somewhere else, processing tactical data Izuku couldn't see. And of course, the training. All of it. The martial arts, the criminology, the stealth exercises. It wasn't about self-reliance. It was an application process. It was an apprenticeship. He turned to Bruce, who was watching him, his face an unreadable mask in the cold glow of the monitors. Izuku's voice was a hoarse whisper. "It's you," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a conclusion. A fact he had danced around in the abstract corners of his notebooks but had never truly allowed himself to believe. "You're him. You're Batman." "Yes," Bruce said simply. The confirmation hit Izuku like a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, his hand gripping the gantry's railing for support. All the fear, all the anger, all the confusion of the past 8 years coalesced into a single, blinding moment of clarity. The creature of the night who had found him in the alley, the terrifying specter who had arrived too late, was the same man who had raised him. The man who lectured him about the futility of hope was the one who stalked the night as the city's most brutal and terrifying symbol. The hypocrisy was staggering. The irony was a knife to the heart. "Why?" Izuku finally choked out. "Why all of this?" "Because my parents' murderer was never caught," Bruce said, his voice echoing in the vast space. "He was a symptom. A piece of random, chaotic violence. I realized then that you can't fight a disease by treating one symptom. You have to fight the disease itself. Gotham is sick. I am the surgeon's knife." He walked over to a bank of lockers and opened one. Inside hung the suit. The bat suit. It was darker, more menacing up close. Scuffed and scarred from 1,000 battles, the cowl's empty white lenses seemed to stare into Izuku's soul. "This is a war, Izuku," Bruce said, turning back to him. "And for years I have fought it alone. But I am not a young man anymore. The toll, it is immense. I need a soldier. I need someone I can trust without reservation. Someone who understands the stakes." He walked toward a different section of the cave, one Izuku hadn't noticed, shrouded in deeper shadow. He flicked a switch, and a series of spotlights illuminated a row of glass display cases. Izuku followed, his feet feeling like lead. Inside the cases were uniforms. The first was a vibrant, colorful costume of red, green, and yellow, with a stylized R on the chest. It was small, designed for an acrobat. A plaque beneath it read, "Robin, Dick Grayson." "The first," Bruce said, his voice softening with a trace of old affection. "He was my son in all but blood. He was the light to my darkness. But he grew up. He needed to be his own man, to step out of my shadow. He is Nightwing now, a protector in another city." He moved to the next case. The uniform within was similar, but the design was subtly different, more aggressive. And it was horribly damaged. The fabric was torn, burned, and stained a dark, rusty brown. A plaque beneath it read, "Robin, Jason Todd." Beside the uniform, mounted on the wall, was a crowbar. Izuku felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. "The second Robin." Bruce's voice was a low, painful rasp. It was the sound of a wound that would never heal. "He was angry. He had a fire in him that I thought I could channel. I was wrong. He was reckless, arrogant. And the Joker took him from me. He tortured him. He beat him to death with that crowbar." Bruce placed a hand on the cold glass of the display case, his reflection a ghostly overlay on the tattered uniform. "He died because of my failure. Because I wasn't fast enough. Because I brought a child into a war. This is the cost, Izuku. This is the reality of what I am asking." He finally turned to face Izuku directly. His expression was grim, devoid of any illusion. "I am not ordering you to do this. I am not commanding you. I am offering you a choice. A terrible choice. You can walk back up that elevator, and we will never speak of this again. You will go to college. You will inherit a portion of my fortune. You will live a normal life. Or you can stay. You can join me in this war. You can help me save the city. But you need to understand what you are choosing. It is a life of pain, of sacrifice, and there is a very real chance it will get you killed." Izuku's mind was a maelstrom. The scale of it all was overwhelming. The Batcave. The mission. The legacy of failure and death embodied by Jason Todd's ruined uniform. His first instinct was to run, to choose the normal life. To escape this madness. Any sane person would. But Izuku Midoriya's life had ceased to be sane at the age of 6. He looked at the display cases. He saw Dick Grayson, the light. He saw Jason Todd, the fire. He saw the ghosts of Bruce's war. Then, his eyes drifted past them, to his own reflection in the glass. He saw a pale, scared boy with green hair. A boy who spent his nights studying monsters and his days dreaming of heroes. He thought of his notebooks. The endless analysis. The drive to understand, to deconstruct, to find order in the chaos. He had been preparing for this his whole life without even knowing it. He had been training to be a soldier in a war he was already fighting on paper. He thought of his parents. Of his mother's last words, her plea for him to be a hero. He thought of All Might's smile, that brilliant beacon of hope. And he thought of Bruce's grim pragmatism, the philosophy of fear he had railed against but was now beginning to understand. He couldn't be All Might. He was quirkless. He couldn't save people with a smile and overwhelming power. But maybe he could save them from the shadows. Maybe he could use his mind, his analysis, the training Bruce had given him, to prevent other children from ending up like him. To prevent other alleys from claiming other families. The choice wasn't about a normal life versus a life of war. The war had already chosen him 8 years ago. This was a choice between being a victim or a fighter. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the cold cave air filling his lungs. His decision settled in his heart, solid and heavy and right. "I'll do it," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence of the cave with the finality of a judge's gavel. Bruce's expression didn't change, but Izuku saw a flicker of something in his eyes, relief, maybe even a sliver of hope. "You would be the third Robin," Bruce said. Izuku shook his head. The name felt wrong. It was a legacy, but it was someone else's. It was burdened with a history that wasn't his. He needed his own name. A name that meant something to him. He thought back to his childhood in Japan. Before the alley. Before Gotham. He remembered the schoolyard. The sneering face of Katsuki Bakugo. The taunts. The name they had twisted from his own. Izuku can also be read as Deku. Deku. Useless. Good for nothing. It was a brand seared into his soul. A word meant to break him. He had carried its weight for years. But here, in the heart of the bat's lair, an idea began to form. An idea born of defiance. "No," Izuku said, his voice stronger now, more resolute. "Not Robin." He looked Bruce directly in the eye. "In Japan, the kids, they had a name for me. Because I was quirkless. They called me Deku." Bruce's brow furrowed. "What does it mean?" "It means useless. One who can't do anything," Izuku said, a bitter smile touching his lips for a second. "It was meant to be an insult. A curse." He straightened his shoulders, standing taller than he ever had before. "I want to reclaim it. I want to turn it into a symbol. I want to show this city, and maybe myself, that even someone useless, someone powerless, can still make a difference. That you don't need superpowers to be a hero." He would take their poison and make it his own. He would take the name that was meant to signify his weakness and forge it into his greatest strength. Bruce stared at him for a long moment, a complex series of emotions playing across his stoic features. He saw the boy's pain, his defiance, and the birth of an identity forged in trauma, just like his own. He gave a single, solemn nod. "Deku," he said, testing the name. "All right. But a symbol needs a suit." He led Izuku to a workstation, a design table with a holographic interface. "This isn't about wearing a costume, Izuku. It's about tactical gear. It needs to protect you, augment your abilities, and serve the mission." "What do you need?" Izuku's mind, finally unleashed, lit up. The countless hours spent analyzing Batman's suit, finding its flaws and strengths, now had a purpose. He began to sketch on the holographic display, his hands moving with a newfound confidence. He rejected the bright colors of the Robin costume. They were a target. He started with a base of dark, practical gray armor plating, similar to Batman's but lighter, designed for agility and speed over brute force absorption. The armor should be a composite, Izuku began, his voice gaining speed and excitement as the design took shape. A ceramic Kevlar weave, lighter than your titanium plates, offering more flexibility at the cost of some resistance to heavy caliber rounds. My fighting style will be evasive, not tanking, he sketched in deep, forest green accents along the arms, legs, and torso. It was a nod to his own name, to his hair, a small piece of his old identity woven into the new. A link to the boy from Muzutafu. The cowl needs to be reinforced, he continued, his fingers flying across the display. But the ears, they shouldn't just be for intimidation. He redesigned them, making them longer, more streamlined. They can house a multi-spectrum sensor suite. Thermal, sonar, EM detection. My greatest asset is information. The suit should reflect that. He added a rebreather and filtration system to the lower half of the mask, remembering the chemical profiles of Scarecrow and Joker. He designed steel-toed boots with magnetic soles for climbing and shock-absorbing insoles for falls. The gloves would have reinforced knuckles and a small terminal in the wrist for interfacing with the Bat computer remotely. Bruce watched, silent and impressed. The boy wasn't designing a costume, he was engineering a weapons system. A system tailored perfectly to his own unique skills. Izuku stood back, looking at the completed 3D model rotating in the air before them. It was him, but not him. It was a fusion of everything he was and everything he was becoming. It was the haunted child of Crime Alley, the analytical mind of Wayne Manor, and the defiant spirit of the boy who still, somewhere deep down, believed in heroes. It was the suit of Deku. It will take Alfred and me a week to fabricate, Bruce said, his voice filled with a gruff pride he couldn't quite conceal. Izuku just nodded, his eyes fixed on the holographic image. He felt a potent mix of terror and exhilaration. The path ahead was dark, dangerous, and uncertain, but for the first time in 8 years, he wasn't just a survivor. He wasn't just a victim, he was a soldier, signing up for the only war that mattered. And he finally had a name. The Batcave had transformed. A week ago, it had been a place of shocking revelation, a secret world unveiled. Now, it was an armory, a mission control, a sanctuary of purpose. In its heart, standing on a raised platform under the stark glare of a diagnostic spotlight, was Izuku. He was a statue carved from anxiety and anticipation, clad in his new skin. The Deku suit was a marvel of engineering, a perfect synthesis of his own analytical designs and Bruce's grimly practical experience. It felt both impossibly heavy and strangely weightless. The dark gray composite plates were molded to his slender frame, offering protection without sacrificing the agility that was his primary asset. The forest green accents seemed to drink the light, tracing the lines of his limbs like veins of phosphorescent moss on stone. Alfred Pennyworth moved around him with the unhurried, precise grace of a master craftsman making his final inspection. His old, steady hands, which had served tea and tended to bullet wounds with equal composure, now checked the seals on Izuku's gauntlets and adjusted the fit of his cowl. The filtration system is active, Master Izuku, Alfred said, his voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the frantic hammering in Izuku's chest. He tapped the rebreather unit on the lower half of the mask. It will protect you from most known airborne toxins present in Gotham, including trace amounts of Joker venom and Scarecrow's standard fear gas. However, direct, concentrated exposure is another matter. Do try to avoid breathing in strange-colored clouds. A simple, yet effective, life rule. Izuku gave a short, sharp nod, the motion feeling strange and buffered inside the cowl. His own breathing was loud in his ears, a rhythmic, mechanical hiss. Understood, Alfred. Comms check, came Bruce's voice, a gravelly command from the Batcomputer's main console. He was already in his own suit, a mountain of black Kevlar and myth, his presence dominating the cavern. Izuku tapped the side of his cowl. Deku, loud and clear. The name felt foreign, audacious on his tongue. He could see his own reflection in the polished black floor, a strange, green and gray creature with glowing white lenses for eyes. It was the hero he had designed, but it wasn't him. Not yet. The sensor suite in your cowl is slave to the main computer. Bruce continued, his tone all business. I'll see what you see. I'll hear what you hear. Do not engage unless I give the signal. Do not break formation. Your objective tonight is simple: observe, learn, and survive. Is that clear, Crystal? Izuku replied, the words sounding more confident than he felt. Alfred placed a final, steadying hand on Izuku's armored shoulder. His gaze was soft, but his eyes held the deep, weary sadness of a man who had seen this ritual play out before. He had armed Dick Grayson, the brilliant, laughing boy. He had armed Jason Todd, the angry, fiery boy. Now he was arming Izuku, the quiet, analytical one. He knew how this story could end. Master Bruce will teach you how to fight, how to investigate, how to instill fear, Alfred said, his voice low enough that it wouldn't be picked up by the comms. Allow me to offer a different piece of advice. He squeezed Izuku's shoulder gently. Survival, Master Izuku, is the highest virtue of the field. It is the prerequisite for all other victories. Do not mistake bravery for foolishness. Come home. That is your primary mission always. The simple sincerity of the plea cut through Izuku's adrenaline-fueled haze. This wasn't just a mission. It was a promise to the man who had been his only source of warmth and kindness for 8 years. I will, Alfred, he promised. With a final nod, Alfred stepped back. Bruce approached, his cape sweeping behind him. He looked Izuku up and down, his expression unreadable behind the cowl. It's time. The roar of the Batmobile's engine was a physical force, a deep, primal bellow that vibrated through the floor and up Izuku's spine. The canopy hissed open, revealing 2 seats. Izuku slid into the passenger side, the seat molding around him as the canopy lowered, encasing them in a cocoon of armor and technology. The world outside vanished, replaced by a wraparound display of the cave. With a lurch that pressed him deep into his seat, the car rocketed forward, down a tunnel and out into the rain-slicked Gotham night. The gargoyle was cold and slick with rain, but the magnetic soles of Izuku's boots held him fast. He crouched beside Batman, a fledgling shadow next to a monolith, looking down at the sprawling, glittering expanse of Gotham City. From this height, the city was almost beautiful. A billion lights twinkled like a fallen galaxy, reflected in the wet streets below. But Izuku knew it was a deceptive beauty. Every light represented a window, and behind every window was a story, many of them steeped in the quiet desperation that was Gotham's lifeblood. The wind whipped around them, carrying the city's cacophony. Sirens wailed in the distance, cars honked in a ceaseless rhythm, and the low, omnipresent hum of a metropolis that never slept filled the air. Close your eyes, Batman commanded, his voice a low rumble beside him. Izuku hesitated, then complied. The world vanished, and the sounds intensified. What do you hear? Bruce asked. Traffic. Sirens from the east, maybe 5 blocks away. The wind, Izuku listed, his analytical mind trying to categorize the data. You're not listening, Batman corrected. You're just hearing noise. The city has a pulse, Deku. You have to learn to feel it. It's a living thing. It breathes, Izuku focused, trying to push past the surface-level noise. He tried to apply the same focus he used when analyzing a complex equation, or a criminal's psychological profile. Listen deeper. Bruce guided him. That siren? It's not just a siren. It's an ambulance, not a police car. The pitch is higher, the pattern is longer. Its heading is southeast, towards Gotham General, a medical emergency, not a crime in progress. The traffic below isn't random. There's a blockage on 4th and Miller. The horns there are angrier, more sustained. The flow is being diverted. That hum isn't just the city, it's the electrical grid. Listen for the substations. A surge or a dip in the hum can tell you where a villain like Electrocutioner might be drawing power. Izuku concentrated, filtering the wall of sound through the new framework Bruce had given him. He began to hear it. The subtle differences. The patterns in the chaos. He could hear the clatter of the elevated train 2 districts over, the bass-heavy thump of music from a nightclub in the Bowery, the sharp, distinct crack that was not a car backfiring but a gunshot, small caliber, from the industrial sector far to their left. A gunshot, Izuku said, his eyes still closed. I heard it, Batman confirmed. A .22 probably. A mugging or a petty dispute. The GCPD will handle it. We're not here for the symptoms, Deku. We're hunting the disease. For the next hour, they remained on the gargoyle, two silent sentinels. Bruce taught Izuku to read the city's language, not just its sounds, but its smells, the scent of cooking oil from the Narrows, the salty brine from the docks, the acrid tang of industrial pollution from the East End. He taught him to watch the flow of people, the way crowds moved, the subtle tells of a pickpocket working a busy street or a spotter watching for police. It was an overwhelming torrent of sensory information, but Izuku's mind, built for analysis, began to process it, to build a living, breathing model of the city in his head. He was beginning to understand. To be Batman wasn't just to fight, it was to know. To be connected to every facet of this urban nightmare, to be its dark, vigilant shepherd. Then, the calms in his ear crackled. It was Alfred's voice, calm and clear from the cave. Sir, I'm picking up chatter on a secured channel used by Black Mask's lieutenants. They're jumpy. It seems a planned arms shipment at the Dixon docks has hit a snag. The buyers are late, and the sellers are getting nervous. Batman's head snapped towards the docks. Show me, he commanded. The lenses of Izuku's cowl lit up, displaying a satellite overlay of the Dixon docks. A red circle highlighted a specific warehouse, Pier 12. The deal is for a crate of military-grade automatic rifles, Alfred supplied. Enough to escalate the current gang war into a bloodbath. There are 8 hostiles on site. No, there are 9. Batman corrected, his eyes narrowed. A new thermal signature had just appeared on Izuku's display, separate from the main group, near a set of pylons by the water. They have a hostage. The word hit Izuku like a physical blow. Hostage. We're moving. Batman grunted, firing his grapple line into the darkness. He was gone in a silent swing, his cape a fleeting shadow against the clouds. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. This was real. He took a shaky breath, aimed his own grapple gun, and fired. The hook bit into concrete, and with a stomach-lurching tug, he was pulled off the gargoyle and into the cold night air, swinging through the concrete canyons of Gotham. The air at the Dixon docks was thick with the smell of dead fish, diesel, and decay. A heavy fog rolled in off the slate-gray water, muffling sound and reducing visibility. It was the perfect environment for stealth. They landed silently on the corrugated roof of Warehouse 12. Below them, through a grimy skylight, they could see the scene. 8 men, all armed, stood around a large wooden crate. They were classic Gotham thugs, hard-faced, clad in worn leather and denim, their nervousness making them jittery and dangerous. Their leader, a brute with a distinctive skull-faced motorcycle helmet, was clearly agitated. Where the hell are they? He barked, kicking the crate. The buyers were supposed to be here 20 minutes ago. Maybe they got spooked, Scully. Another thug whined. They'll be more spooked when Sionis hears about it. Scully shot back, referring to Roman Sionis, the sadistic crime lord known as Black Mask. Batman pointed to the far side of the warehouse, near a wide loading bay door that was open to the foggy pier. A man was tied to a chair, a burlap sack over his head. He was the 9th thermal signature, the hostage. He's the informant who tipped off the buyers about the shipment. Batman whispered, his voice a bare murmur in Izuku's ear. The buyers are a rival gang. They're not late. They set him up to be eliminated. Izuku's blood ran cold. This wasn't just an arms deal. It was an execution. The plan is simple. Batman continued, his voice low and clinical. We use the fog as cover. I'll take the 4 on the left. You take the 3 on the right. We move on my signal. Neutralize them quickly and silently. Scully is mine. The hostage is the priority. Izuku nodded, his body humming with a nervous energy. His mind was racing, cataloging entry points, enemy positions, potential ricochet angles. He was ready. He was trained for this. He watched as Scully grew more impatient. The thug stomped over to the hostage and ripped the sack off his head. The informant was young, barely out of his teens, his face a mask of pure terror. I'm tired of waiting, Scully growled, pulling a heavy revolver from his belt. Let's give our friends a reason to regret standing us up. He cocked the hammer, the sound echoing with terrifying finality in the cavernous warehouse. He pressed the barrel of the gun to the hostage's temple. The young man started sobbing, pleading incoherently, and something inside Izuku snapped. All the training, all the lectures on fear and pragmatism, all the grim reality of Gotham, it all evaporated in an instant. He wasn't the analyst. He wasn't the soldier. He was a 6-year-old boy in an alley, watching helplessly as the world ended. He saw the gun, he heard the terrified sobs, and a single, primal imperative screamed through his soul: save him. He didn't wait for Batman's signal. He didn't think about stealth or tactics. He was filled with a sudden, righteous fire, a burning need to be the hero who arrived on time. The spirit of All Might, the one he kept hidden in the secret corners of his heart, surged to the forefront. He stood up on the roof, a silhouette against the foggy night sky. He took a deep breath. "Stop right there, villains!" he yelled, his voice electronically amplified by his cowl, booming through the warehouse. He leaped through the skylight, landing on the warehouse floor in a 3-point crouch, a perfect, heroic entrance. He rose to his full height, and, with all the conviction he could muster, shouted the sacred words. "Why? Because I am here!" For a single, glorious second, it worked. The 8 thugs froze, their heads whipping around to stare at this bizarre, green and gray apparition that had literally dropped from the sky. Scully, his gun still pressed to the hostage's head, was momentarily stunned into inaction. The moment shattered. These were not the theatrical villains of Japanese media, who might have paused to monologue. These were Gotham criminals. Their shock lasted precisely as long as it took for their brains to process new threat. Their reaction was not fear. It was violent, pragmatic self-preservation. "What the hell is that?" one of them yelled. "It's one of the Bat's freaks." "Light him up!" Scully roared, abandoning the hostage and leveling his revolver at Izuku. The air erupted. The warehouse, which had been filled with a tense silence, was suddenly a hurricane of noise and violence. Muzzle flashes lit up the space like strobe lights. The deafening crack 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 of automatic gunfire echoed off the metal walls, the sound 1,000 times louder and more terrifying than it had been from a distance. Bullets whizzed past Izuku's head, sparking off the concrete floor around him. His theatrical entrance hadn't scared them. It had turned him into the single biggest target in the room. His training kicked in, overriding the heroic fervor. He dodged, weaved, and threw himself behind a stack of crates, the wood splintering as bullets tore through it. His heart was a jackhammer against his ribs. The plan was in ruins. Stealth was gone. The element of surprise was a smoking crater. "Deku! What have you done?" Batman's voice was a furious snarl in his ear, but he was already in motion. A black shape dropped from the rafters on the far side of the room, a predator unleashed. Izuku knew he had to fix his mistake. He peered out from behind the crates. 3 thugs were advancing on his position, their rifles blazing. He activated the sensors in his cowl, the world dissolving into a wireframe map of tactical data. He saw their firing lines, their reloading patterns. He launched himself out of cover. He was a blur of motion, throwing a trio of green, bat-shaped shuriken. They weren't lethal, but they were sharp. 2 of the thugs cried out as the blades bit into their hands, forcing them to drop their weapons. He closed the distance on the third, sliding under a burst of fire and sweeping his legs, sending the man crashing to the floor. He was good. He was fast. His training was real. But the fight wasn't clean. It wasn't a sparring session in the gym. It was messy, chaotic, and terrifying. While he was dealing with his 3, another thug had flanked him. Izuku heard the telltale click of a gun behind him and spun around, just in time to see a man with a scarred face and a cruel smile aiming a pistol straight at his chest. Izuku reacted on instinct, throwing a smoke pellet at the man's feet. The pellet erupted in a thick, choking cloud. He used the moment of disorientation to charge forward, delivering a powerful, precise palm-heel strike to the man's chin. The thug's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. He had neutralized 4 of them. He was winning. He felt a surge of triumphant adrenaline. He turned, ready to find his next target, and ran straight into the massive form of Scully. The gang leader hadn't bothered with a gun. He swung a heavy iron tire iron in a vicious arc. Izuku was too close to dodge. He raised his armored forearm to block, just as Bruce had taught him. The impact was bone-jarring. It wasn't a practice staff. It was a solid piece of steel swung with murderous intent. Pain, sharp and electric, shot up his arm. The force of the blows sent him staggering backward. Scully grinned from behind his helmet's grimacing facade. "Not so tough without your big brother, are ya, kid?" He advanced, swinging the tire iron again and again. Izuku was forced onto the defensive, blocking and dodging, the clang of metal on his armor echoing through the warehouse. He was faster, more agile, but Scully was a brute, his attacks relentless and powerful. Then came the moment that would haunt him. As he ducked under another wild swing, he saw the hostage. In the chaos, the young man had managed to struggle free from his ropes, and was making a desperate scramble for the exit. But another thug, one Izuku had missed, stepped out from behind a pillar and grabbed him, putting him in a headlock and pressing the muzzle of a pistol to his cheek. "Nobody move, or the snitch gets it!" The thug screamed, his eyes wide with panic. Everything stopped. Izuku froze. His eyes were locked on the gun, on the terrified, tear-streaked face of the hostage. All his momentum, all his training, all his analytical thought bled away, replaced by a single, paralyzing wave of ice-cold dread. The dark, round hole of the gun barrel. The absolute finality of it. It was the alley. It was the smell of burnt sugar, and the sound of his mother's last breath. It was the horrifying powerlessness of being a child watching the world end. His mind, his greatest asset, went completely blank. He couldn't process tactical options. He couldn't see angles or opportunities. All he could see was that gun, and the life it was about to extinguish. He was 6 years old all over again. I said stop," he stammered, his amplified voice trembling. The thug holding the hostage laughed, a ragged, ugly sound. "Look at him! He's just a kid in a costume! He's scared!" Scully saw his chance. He saw the hesitation, the fear in Izuku's posture. He lunged forward, not with the tire iron, but with his own pistol, the one he had dropped earlier. He scooped it up and aimed it point blank at Izuku's face. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Izuku stared down the barrel of the gun, his entire world narrowing to that single, black circle. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. His mind was screaming, but his body wouldn't respond. This was it. This was how he died. A stupid, useless failure. Flash. A black shape blotted out the light. Thwack. A sound like a side of beef being hit with a sledgehammer. Scully's head snapped to the side, and he collapsed in a heap, out cold before he hit the ground. Zip. Thud. A batarang flew through the air with impossible speed and precision, striking the gun from the hand of the thug holding the hostage. In the same instant, Batman dropped from above, landing behind the thug, his movements utterly silent. A single, brutal elbow struck to the base of the skull, and the man went limp, releasing the hostage, who collapsed to the ground, sobbing with relief. It was over. The entire intervention, from the moment Scully had aimed his gun at Izuku, had taken less than 2 seconds. Silence descended upon the warehouse, broken only by the hostage's choked sobs and the gentle lapping of water against the pier outside. The remaining conscious thugs were already groaning on the floor, efficiently and brutally dispatched by Batman while Izuku was being overwhelmed. Izuku stood there, trembling, his chest heaving. He stared at the unconscious form of Scully at his feet, then at Batman, who was now helping the terrified hostage to his feet, speaking to him in a low, calming voice before melting back into the shadows to ensure the scene was secure for the approaching police. The shame that washed over Izuku was a physical entity. It was hot and suffocating, worse than any blow Scully had landed. He had failed. Utterly. His grand, heroic entrance had jeopardized the mission, endangered the hostage, and almost gotten him killed. He had frozen. He had been useless. He was Deku. And for the first time, the name felt like the curse it was always meant to be. The ride back to the manor was conducted in absolute, crushing silence. Izuku didn't dare speak. He just stared at his reflection in the dark canopy of the Batmobile, at the ridiculous, pathetic costume of the hero he had failed to be. When they arrived in the Batcave, he expected yelling. He expected fury. What he got was worse. Bruce removed his cowl and placed it on the console, his face pale and grim, etched with a terrifying, cold disappointment. He began methodically stripping off his gauntlets, his movements precise and controlled. Izuku stood numbly in the center of the cave, the suit suddenly feeling like a lead weight. He reached up and pulled off his own cowl, the cool air of relief on his flushed skin. He couldn't meet Bruce's eyes. "Report," Bruce said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. It was infinitely more chilling than rage. I failed," Izuku whispered, his voice cracking. "That is not a report. That is a conclusion," Bruce said coldly. "Report your actions from the moment we were on the roof." Forcing the words out, Izuku recounted everything, his voice heavy with shame. "I saw him put the gun to the hostage's head. I didn't wait for your signal. I broke stealth. I engaged the enemy directly. You announced your presence to 8 armed men in an open space," Bruce corrected, his voice like chipping stone. "You made yourself the primary target and surrendered every tactical advantage we had. Continue." I shouted a phrase, "I am here." Bruce finished for him, his voice laced with a venomous irony. "A phrase belonging to a hero who can stop bullets. A hero who can level a city block with a single punch. You are a boy in an armored suit. Your only advantages are stealth, strategy, and fear. You threw all of them away for a dramatic entrance." Continue. Izuku's narrative faltered as he described the fight, his small successes feeling hollow and meaningless in the face of his ultimate failure. He finally got to the end. He had the hostage. He had a gun on him. And Scully, he had a gun on me. And I just stopped. He finally looked up, his eyes swimming with tears of frustration and shame. I froze. Bruce finally stopped what he was doing and turned to face him fully. "Yes. You did." He walked toward Izuku, his presence immense. He stopped directly in front of him. "Look around you, Izuku," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He gestured to the sprawling cave, the computer, the memorial case for Jason Todd glinting in the distance. "This is not a comic book. This is not a feel-good news report from Japan. This is Gotham. And in Gotham, there is a language that every criminal understands. It is the only language that matters in the moments between life and death. It is the language of fear." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to an intense, furious whisper. "When you leaped through that skylight, what did they see? A symbol of hope? A hero to inspire them to be better men? No, they saw a kid in a costume. They saw a target. Hope is a conversation, Izuku. Fear is a command." He jabbed a finger at Izuku's chest. "They don't need a symbol of hope to rally behind Deku. They need to be afraid. Afraid of the dark. Afraid of the shadows. Afraid that a monster is coming for them who is worse than anything they could ever imagine. That fear is what makes them hesitate. It is what makes them drop the gun. Your grand entrance, your shout, it didn't give the hostage hope. It got a gun pointed at his head and another one pointed at yours." Every word was a hammer blow, systematically shattering the last vestiges of Izuku's heroic idealism. "Your hesitation got you almost killed," Bruce said, his voice like ice. "My hesitation would have gotten that hostage killed. There is no room for it. There are no second chances. There is only the mission and survival." He turned his back on Izuku, a gesture of final, damning dismissal. "Take off the suit. Go to your room. We are done for tonight." Izuku stood there, shaking, the tears finally breaking free and tracing hot paths down his cold cheeks. He looked at his hands, at the green-accented gauntlets of his suit. It wasn't a hero's uniform. It was a fool's costume. He slowly, numbly, began to remove the armor, piece by piece, leaving it in a discarded pile on the floor. He walked to the elevator, not daring to look back at Bruce, not daring to look at the memorial for the last boy who had failed this test. The doors closed, and he was alone with the crushing, absolute weight of his failure. The hero of his dreams was dead, and he had killed him himself. All that was left was a scared, useless boy. All that was left was Deku. For 3 weeks, the Deku suit remained in a heap on the Batcave floor. It was a silent, accusatory monument to Izuku's failure. Bruce had forbidden Alfred from touching it, leaving it exactly where Izuku had discarded it, a pile of dark gray and forest green armor that looked like the shed skin of a creature that had been defeated. Every time Izuku descended into the cave for his training sessions, which had become even more brutal and unforgiving, he had to walk past it. The sight of it was a constant, gut-wrenching reminder of the gun barrel, the paralyzing fear, and the cold, cutting disappointment in Bruce's voice. The dynamic between them had shifted from strained to glacial. Bruce was no longer a mentor, he was a drill instructor. Their conversations were stripped down to commands and acknowledgments. 5 more reps, faster. You're telegraphing your right hook. Again. There was no praise, no guidance, only a relentless, grinding process designed to sand away Izuku's weaknesses through sheer, painful repetition. He was being reforged in a crucible of silence and shame. Izuku accepted it. He deserved it. He threw himself into the training with a desperate, self-flagellating intensity. He pushed his body to its breaking point, and then further. He spent his nights not dreaming of All Might, but running tactical simulations in his head, replaying the disastrous patrol over and over, analyzing his every mistake with a cold, merciless clarity. The boy who had dreamed of being a symbol of hope was gone. In his place was a recruit determined to exorcise the ghost of his own failure. He was stripping away the hero, and trying to build a soldier, from the wreckage. Gotham, in its own indifferent way, continued its chaotic dance. The news was a familiar litany of misery, another gang skirmish in the Bowery, another Arkham inmate returned to the streets on a technicality, another corrupt city official indicted. Batman went out every night, a lone specter of vengeance, and returned every morning with new bruises and a deeper scowl. The space in the Batmobile where Izuku had sat remained empty. Then, the game began. It started subtly, a strange ripple in the city's usual current of crime. The first incident was at the Gotham Museum of Antiquities. The target was the Eye of Horus, a priceless Egyptian artifact. But it wasn't a simple theft. The security guards weren't assaulted. They were found locked in a storage closet, unharmed. The display case wasn't smashed. It had been opened by bypassing a complex, pressure-sensitive electronic lock. The artifact was gone, and in its place, resting on the velvet pedestal, was a single, elegantly calligraphed card. On the card, in emerald green ink, was a riddle. I have cities, but no houses. I have mountains, but no trees. I have water, but no fish. What am I? Bruce, standing over the evidence table in the Batcave, grunted. A map. Nigma, Edward Nigma. The Riddler. A name that elicited more weary sighs than genuine fear from Gotham's law enforcement. Riddler was a narcissist, a genius with a cripplingly pathological need to prove his intellectual superiority. His crimes were always elaborate puzzles, designed not for material gain but to massage his own ego by outsmarting Batman. He was a pest, a nuisance, but rarely a serious threat. He's been quiet for a year, Bruce muttered, looking at the digital file on the main screen. Arkham's psychiatrists claimed he was showing signs of progress. Clearly, they were mistaken. Izuku stood at a respectful distance, observing. He wasn't invited to participate, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. He knew Nigma's file by heart. His notebook contained a detailed profile. Subject exhibits extreme narcissistic personality disorder coupled with an obsessive-compulsive need for validation through intellectual games. His weakness is his ego. He cannot abide a riddle that goes unsolved or is solved too easily. The crime is merely the medium. The riddle is the message. The next night, the second piece fell into place. A daring daylight robbery at the Gotham City Bank Trust. Again, no violence. The vault hadn't been blasted open. Its multi-layered temporal lock had been solved like a child's puzzle. Millions in bearer bonds were gone. And in their place, another green card. What can run but never walks, has a mouth but never talks, has a head but never weeps, has a bed but never sleeps, a river. Bruce growled, pulling up a map of Gotham on the Bat computer. He cross-referenced the two answers. Map, river. He's pointing to something. The Gotham River. The third crime came 12 hours later, confirming the pattern. A sophisticated data heist from the city's digital archives. Not financial records or secret files, but a single, specific set of documents, the original architectural blueprints for the Grand Heritage Bridge, which spanned the Gotham River. The calling card was left taped to the monitor of the hacked server. What has an eye, but cannot see? A needle, Bruce concluded, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He overlaid the bridge blueprints on the city map. Map river needle. He's pointing to a specific location, the central spire of the bridge. The needle, as the construction workers called it. He's planning something there, Izuku said, speaking out of turn. He couldn't help himself. The puzzle was elegant, and the pull was irresistible. Bruce shot him a cold look, a silent reprimand for speaking without being addressed. But he didn't contradict him. He wants me to meet him there. It's a classic Enigma setup. A grand stage for his masterpiece. But as Batman prepared to head out, something felt wrong to Izuku. It was too simple. Too clean. This was the Riddler's classic MO, but it was elevated. The crimes were more sophisticated, more daring than his previous outings. The bypass of the museum's security, the cracking of the temporal vault, these were a significant step up from his usual fare. It was like a chess player who had only ever played in parks suddenly competing at a grandmaster level. He watched Batman disappear in the Batmobile, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He turned to the back computer, unable to shake the feeling that they were missing a piece of the puzzle. He pulled up the case files, looking at the 3 riddles, the 3 crimes. He wasn't looking at them as a detective anymore. He was looking at them as an analyst. I have cities, but no houses. Map, Museum of Antiquities. What can run but never walks? River Bank Trust. What has an eye, but cannot see? Needle, City Archives. There was no thematic link between the locations. An ancient artifact, modern currency, digital information. The only thing connecting them was the Riddler himself. But what if the locations were part of the riddle? His fingers flew across a secondary keyboard, pulling up everything he could on the 3 targets. His eyes scanned financial reports, security schematics, personnel files. He wasn't looking for clues, he was looking for patterns, for an underlying structure. And then he saw it. A subtle, almost invisible thread. The museum's new security system, the one Riddler had bypassed, was designed and installed by OmniSEC, a Wayne Enterprises subsidiary. The bank's temporal vault was manufactured by a company that had been acquired by Wayne Powers 2 years ago. The city's digital archive servers were maintained under a lucrative contract with Fox TK, another Wayne subsidiary. They were all connected. Not to the city, but to him. To Bruce. This wasn't just a challenge to Batman. This was a direct, personal attack on the infrastructure of Bruce Wayne's corporate empire. Alfred! Izuku called out, his voice sharp with urgency. The bridge isn't the endgame. It's a distraction. The riddles, the locations, it's all a message for Bruce, not Batman. He's targeting Wayne Enterprises. Alfred, who had been monitoring communications, looked up, his expression grim. I'm afraid you're right, Master Izuku. And I believe Mr. Enigma has just delivered his punchline. On the main screen, a live news feed flickered to life. A reporter stood, rain plastering her hair to her face, in front of the Wayne Enterprises building in the financial district. Unprecedented scenes here at Wayne Tower, she was saying, her voice strained over the rising sound of sirens. Moments ago, every digital screen and billboard controlled by Wayne Media across the city simultaneously blacked out, only to be replaced by a single, flashing green question mark, and a message that reads, "Riddle me this, Gotham's favorite son. If you are justice, where is your sight? When your own house is plundered in the dead of night?" It appears to be the work of the infamous Riddler, in what is his most audacious crime to date. The camera panned up. The entire face of Wayne Tower, a marvel of modern architecture, was now a cascade of glittering green question marks. "Alfred!" came Batman's voice over the comms, tight with fury. He was at the bridge. It was, as Izuku had suspected, empty. "What's my damage?" "Severe, sir," Alfred replied grimly. Enigma didn't just hijack the media screens. He used the access he gained from the 3 preliminary crimes as a key. He's bypassed our corporate firewalls. He's not stealing money. He's stealing data. Proprietary RD, confidential project files, applied sciences schematics. The unspoken part hung in the air, schematics for Batman's own technology. Izuku felt a chill. This was a new Riddler. The old Enigma was a peacock, desperate for attention. This one was a predator. He had used his classic, theatrical style as camouflage for a sophisticated, multi-layered cyber attack. He had played on Batman's expectations, using his own history as a weapon. He had made Bruce the butt of the joke. And for a narcissist like Riddler, there was only one thing better than outsmarting your nemesis: knowing that your nemesis knows you've outsmarted him. Riddler would be monitoring their response. He would be listening. He's watching. Izuku breathed, staring at the flashing green question marks on the screen. This whole thing, it's a performance. He wants an audience. It was then that a new message bloomed across the screens of Gotham, overriding the flashing question marks. It was another riddle, but this one was different. It wasn't addressed to Batman or Bruce Wayne. A new piece has entered the game, or so it would seem. A splash of green in a monochrome dream. You cry for the light but are born of the dark, so riddle me this, little fledgling spark. I have no voice, but I can tell you stories. I have no legs, but I travel on journeys. I can be a shield or a sword in a fight. What am I, little whisper in the night? The blood drained from Izuku's face. The riddle wasn't for Bruce. It was for him. Alfred, Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. How? The patrol at the docks, Master Izuku, Alfred said, his face pale. Your debut. It was reported. A new, green-clad vigilante alongside the Bat. Most dismissed it as rumor. It appears Mr. Enigma pays closer attention than most. Riddler had seen him. He had profiled him. A splash of green in a monochrome dream. You cry for the light but are born of the dark. He had somehow deduced the core of Izuku's internal conflict. And now he was being drawn into the game. Batman's voice crackled over the comms, a low, dangerous growl. Deku. The riddle. Solve it. Izuku's mind raced, his earlier panic giving way to the cold, analytical focus he had honed for years. He broke the riddle down. No voice tells stories. No legs travels journeys. A shield or a sword. The answer clicked into place, obvious and chilling. It's a book, Izuku said. Or more specifically, a notebook. His blood ran cold. He thought of his locked drawer. His analysis. He's not just profiling you, sir, Alfred said, his voice grim. He's profiling your new partner. The game had changed. The Riddler, intrigued by this new, unknown variable in his equation with Batman, had shifted his focus. He was no longer content to play against the king. He wanted to test the new pawn. The following days were a tense, intellectual siege. Riddler didn't commit any more physical crimes. Instead, he turned Gotham into his personal puzzle box, and Izuku was the one he was trying to solve. Every 12 hours, a new riddle would appear on the city's screens, each one more complex and more personal than the last. One riddle was a complex chemical equation, with a single missing variable. The answer, which Izuku solved after an hour of frantic calculation, was sodium benzoate, a common food preservative, but also a key component in the manufacturing of certain industrial dyes. It was a test of his scientific knowledge. Another riddle was a quote from a classical Japanese text, the Hagakure, with a single kanji character replaced. Finding the correct character revealed the word Bushido, the samurai code of honor. It was a test of his cultural background. He's building a profile, Izuku wrote frantically in a new notebook, this one dedicated solely to Enigma. He's testing my intelligence, my education, my psychological makeup. Each riddle is a data point. He's trying to figure out who I am. Why? Bruce watched, his expression a thunderous mask of controlled fury. He was forced to the sidelines, a spectator in a game where his new protege was the star player. He hated it. He hated the vulnerability, the exposure. He had Lucius Fox and his cybersecurity teams working around the clock to try and trace Enigma's digital footprint and lock down Wayne Enterprises' data. But Riddler was a ghost in the machine, always one step ahead. Izuku found himself locked in a strange, intimate battle of wits with a man he had never met. It was exhilarating and terrifying. He spent every waking moment either in the Batcave, poring over Riddler's old case files, or at his own desk, racking his brain for the solution to the latest puzzle. He felt the immense pressure of the city's attention on him. The media had dubbed the mysterious new player in Riddler's game the Emerald Enigma. He was a ghost, a whisper, but the whole city was watching to see if he could keep up with its most notorious intellectual terrorist. He began to understand Riddler's mind in a way Batman, perhaps, could not. Bruce saw Enigma as a criminal, a broken man whose pathology expressed itself in puzzles. Izuku saw him as a performer, a narcissist who craved not just victory, but an audience, a rival who could truly appreciate the artistry of his work. Batman's grim, brutal efficiency almost insulted Riddler's intelligence. But Izuku, by engaging with the riddles, by playing the game, was giving Enigma exactly what he wanted, a worthy opponent. The pressure mounted. Each solved riddle was met with a new, harder one. It was a war of intellectual attrition. Izuku grew pale, with dark circles under his eyes. He barely ate, he barely slept. He was consumed by the game. You need to rest, Izuku, Bruce commanded one evening, finding him hunched over the bat computer, staring at a complex star chart Riddler had posted. The riddle was hidden in the constellations. I can't, Izuku mumbled, not taking his eyes off the screen. If I miss something, if I'm too slow, if you're too slow, you make a mistake, Bruce countered, his voice firm but with a sliver of concern breaking through the icy facade. He is trying to wear you down. He is using your own intellect against you. Do not let him. But Izuku couldn't stop. He was trapped in the loop. The validation of solving a puzzle, the fear of what would happen if he failed, it was an addictive, toxic cycle. He was so focused on the what of the riddles that he was losing sight of the why. Why was Riddler doing this? What was his endgame? The answer came on a cold, rainy Friday night. The latest riddle had been the most difficult yet, a multi-layered cryptographic puzzle hidden within a musical composition. It had taken Izuku and the Bat computer's full processing power nearly 6 hours to crack. The answer was a single set of coordinates. Not a famous landmark. Not a Wayne Enterprises building. It was a location in the Tricorner Yards, an old, abandoned shipping district. He's finally making a physical move, Bruce said, already heading for the Batmobile. He's finished his game. Now he's ready to declare a winner. Izuku stood up, a sudden, horrible realization dawning on him. He looked at the solution. The coordinates. Then he looked back at the board where they had mapped out all of Riddler's previous moves. The museum, the bank, the city archives, the data heist at Wayne Tower. And now, these coordinates. He saw the pattern. Not a tactical pattern, but a psychological one. It's another trap, Izuku said, his voice hollow. But it's not for you. Bruce paused. What do you mean? This whole game, targeting me, building a profile, it was all a distraction. It was misdirection. He made us focus on me, on the novelty of the new player. He kept us busy solving his puzzles. Izuku's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up city infrastructure maps. He wasn't just stealing data from Wayne Enterprises. He was mapping the system. He was looking for vulnerabilities, not in the company. In the city, he overlaid a map of Gotham's power grid. The coordinates for the shipping yard were meaningless. But if you drew a line from the museum, to the bank, to Wayne Tower, and then to the coordinates, they formed 3 points of a perfect square. Where's the fourth point? Bruce demanded, seeing it too. Izuku's blood turned to ice. He punched in the calculation. The fourth corner of the square landed squarely on one building, the Gotham City Dam. The massive hydroelectric dam that provided power to a third of the city and held back the Gotham River, which, thanks to the recent heavy rains, was swollen to near bursting capacity. He's not at the shipping yard, Izuku breathed, his heart sinking. He's at the dam. And he's had a week of us being distracted to set up whatever he's planning. A new message flashed across the back computer screen. It wasn't a riddle. It was a live video feed. It showed the interior of the dam's primary control room, and in the center of it, standing before the controls that managed the floodgates, was the Riddler. He was clad in his garish green, question-mark-covered suit, but he looked different. There was a new, manic confidence in his eyes. "Good evening, Batman," he said, giving a theatrical bow. "And a special greeting to my new favorite intellectual sparring partner. You are clever. I knew you would be, but you've solved my little puzzle just a few minutes too late. He gestured to the control panel, which was wired with a complex array of explosives. I have, of course, rerouted primary control of the dam's spillways to a remote trigger, a trigger which is tied to a rather delightful conundrum. In precisely 1 hour, I will open the floodgates. A tidal wave will wash through the lower districts of Gotham, the Narrows, the Bowery, washing away the filth and causing billions in damages. A truly spectacular show, he grinned, a triumphant, narcissistic smirk. But I am a sporting man. I have set up a secondary game for you. I have placed a series of dirty bombs, nothing nuclear, just conventional explosives laced with radioactive medical waste, in several key locations. A hospital. A crowded subway station. A homeless shelter. You will have a choice. You can come here, to the dam, and try to stop the flood. Or you can try and find and disarm my little party favors. You do not, however, have time to do both. He tapped a final card he was holding. As for my new friend, I have left a special puzzle just for him. After all his hard work, he deserves a prize, don't you think? Toodaloo! The screen went black. Izuku stared in horror. This was the endgame. A monstrous, unwinnable scenario. A city-wide death trap built on a foundation of intellectual arrogance. He had played the Riddler's game, and his prize was the lives of thousands of innocent people hanging in the balance. Every riddle he had solved had been another break in this trap. He had been so proud of his intelligence, his analytical skill. And the Riddler had turned it into a weapon pointed at the heart of the city.